Καλώς ορίσατε. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. My name is Alexandros and I'm the founder of the Famagusta Council think tank. The Famagusta Council is a new endeavor here in the United States aimed at creating a think tank that focuses on global political issues with a particular interest in matters relating to the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, Cyprus, Europe, and the Middle East. Like all think tanks, Famagusta Council has selected two specialized topics that look beyond conventional perspective. The first area of specialization is culture as a means of education and diplomacy. And the second one, space and global diplomacy. The name of the think tank Famagusta Council, of course, comes from a town that my family comes from the last 500 years. It's a Greek town with 3,000 years of Greek history at the Republic of Cyprus, which is now occupied by the Turkish troops due to the Turkish occupation, due to the Turkish invasion of 1974. During the first trial period of the think tank, we offer specialized history courses focusing on Byzantium and the Macedonian history. In the new period of 2025-26, in addition to the courses and lectures, our goal is to host specialized speakers and analysts of the aforementioned topics. We start today with international law of the sea and geopolitical tensions, focusing on the South China Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. Our keynote speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. Lawrence Howard, PhD Professor of Global Business and Transportation at Maritime College. The moderator for today is Dr. Nikolas Alexίου, Professor of Sociology and Founding Director of the Hellenic American Project. I will leave the remaining introductions to my friend and collaborator, Dr. Nikόλαος Αλεξίου. Thank you, Mr. Howard. At the end, I would like to thank the representatives from the permanent mission of Greece and Cyprus to the United Nations, as well the representatives of the Cypriot and the Cretan community here in the United States for attending the event. Special thanks to Antonios Petsaris, our consultant at the Famagusta Council. Thank you again. And special thanks to Grammaticus Macedon. He's our creative director and founder of Hellenism. Thank you again. Grammaticus Macedon, he's taking care of the filming of the tonight's event. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great night. Thank you and enjoy.
Well, you know today the date, right? It is Friday and 13th. And for some reasons they have it as a bad luck day, but I think your presence here shows the opposite. We are very lucky to be here. Thank you for coming. And we're very happy and honored and pleased to have Professor Howard today, Lawrence Howard today, to talk about a very important issue in many respects. Not only political and economic, but also ethical, perhaps. You're going to touch
ethical, moral.
You're going to touch various aspects of that. Professor Howard has a PhD in political science. He's an expert in law of maritime. You teach at a very nice university. I've been there a couple of times to see the museum that they have.
Shipping Museum is a wonderful place.
Yes, my father was in the Merchant Marine, a radio officer, and I always miss that. I used to travel with him when I had a break from school, and I go to see the museum and have memories there, which is a SUNY school, and this is very important that you teach. I am from CUNY, and I think public education, although it suffers some drawbacks recently, it's very good to have a SUNY professor here in Astoria. Besides the Maritime College at SUNY, also you taught in California?
At the California State Maritime
Yes.
College.
And this is very important, and also in Washington.
University of Washington, my alma mater. I taught there as well as was a graduate student.
This is fantastic. And today's topic that you have prepared for us, and thank you for that, is international law of the sea and geopolitical tensions.
I think we woke up this morning to a story about more and more tension, right?
Yes, tensions all over the place. At this moment, a lot of bombs, from one country to another.
One country to another.
And let's talk about tensions and how we should understand, explain, and do something about it. Give us your insight.
Well, first of all, the topic of international law always revolves around the issue of what is law? What is law? And actually, some people have represented to me that international law is an oxymoron, like military intelligence. However, if you look into military intelligence, you see that the people aren't stupid. There's a lot of reasons for such organizations, and they do things that are beneficial as well as adverse. In a similar fashion, if you investigate international law, you see it as not law with a cop on the corner giving you a ticket when you step on a line, but as a matter of fact, in the nearly 500 years of its existence, most of international law has been followed because most of international law is routine. And I have a slide in there that shows some of this, but I wanted to talk about our goal tonight. Anthony came to me and asked that question: what is international law? And in fact, who is the cop on the corner? Who makes nation states obey? It's not an easy question, and it's one we'll explore tonight. So that's our goal, to get through that exploration with a few case studies. And some of the case studies may be hot issues, but I want to assure you I intend to approach those hot issues in an objective fashion as possible. So if we could go to the next slide. These are the sections of my very long PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to sift through some very quickly, and others we'll dwell on for a while. But the first thing I want to talk about are definitions of law and a comparison of international law with domestic law, and talk about some of the authorities. So if we could go to the next section. What is law? Next slide. International law has two parts, public and private. What some of you call maritime law is actually part of private international law, but it also overlaps into public international law. Most of private international law is about commercial business involving structuring charter parties, businesses between charterers and owners of ships or disponent owners. Somebody, an organization can bareboat charter a ship, and they legally become the disponent owner of the ship, completely responsible for the ship, and that disponent owner can let out time charters or voyage charters. This is clearly private international law, right? But suppose there is a dispute that arises between the charterer and the disponent owner or operator of a vessel. Well, usually in the charter party there is a dispute settlement clause, right? But if things get out of hand and one party says you owe me money, and the other party says you're not going to get paid, the ship can be arrested. The ship becomes a person in international law. Similar to a house having a mortgage. If the mortgage goes into default, it's on the house, right? So there's a kind of juridical personality there. Public international law, on the other hand, has to do with things like law of the sea. What kind of territorial water limit do we have? What is the contiguous zone? What is the exclusive economic zone? Do we have a right of navigation? Why can't we lay a cable in a certain area? Why is some country objecting to that? What about the United Nations? Isn't that like an international Congress and government? The answer is both yes and no. If we could go on to a next slide. In the United States, we call maritime law both maritime and admiralty. And in the Constitution of the United States, if you go to the next slide, the federal judiciary is given responsibility for issues having to do with maritime law or admiralty law. Now, that has to do with the commercial end of the business. And that also has to do with criminal law. For instance, if just recently off the coast of Southern California, the United States Coast Guard arrested a chief engineer and imprisoned him for violating record-keeping regulations on bilge water. And what could he do? Well, he took it to court. He hired a lawyer and went to federal district court and argued that the law in the United States was never meant to imprison chief engineers. It was the master who should be imprisoned in any case. I'm sure the master thought greatly of that. But in any case, the law was vague and imprecise. So it went through the federal district court where the feds ruled against the chief engineer, and then to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which handles everything in California. And the chief engineer lost. Now, that is an example of private international law overlapping into public international law, criminal activities, and civil matters that erupt into more than arbitrations, arrests of ships and things like that, always have that kind of an overlap. Could we go to the next slide? That's the case I was just talking about. It was last October, October 10th, 2024. Next one, please. So this is the constitutional provision that gives the federal judiciary control over matters of maritime and admiralty law, private international law. Next slide, please. The next slide explains to you the constitutional authority for dealing with matters of public international law, and that's the President of the United States. Now, this is a very interesting situation. If you call an international agreement with another country a treaty, the Constitution says you have to have a 2/3 support of the U.S. Senate for it to become law, for it to be ratified. Oh, all right. So in 1994, when Bill Clinton wanted the NAFTA agreement to be ratified, he wanted the political clout of it not being an executive agreement and being able to say that Congress approved it. But he knew he did not have 2/3 majority in the Senate. So what did he do? He tacked it on to the Customs Modernization Bill, which was very popular and had full support in both houses of Congress. And so NAFTA became an international agreement, not a treaty, and it was approved by Congress. And Clinton could always point to that, approved by Congress. Right. Next slide, please. The oldest international law that we are familiar with, you see on the screen there, that is a treaty between the Hittites and the Egyptians. That treaty was after the Battle of Kadesh, in which both sides claimed that they won, but really both sides suffered devastating damages. This was, give or take, 50 years or so after Moses was supposed to have led the Hebrews out of Egypt. So this is the earliest recorded international agreement that we have, actually called a treaty. Excuse me. There are two relics of this treaty left. One is in Constantinople, in a museum there, and the other is in Egypt, in an ancient Egyptian temple, Luxor's Karnak temple. Next slide, please. So what is law? What is law? The United Nations Charter is a major multilateral treaty of our time, okay? And a peremptory norm of what we call international law is that treaties must be obeyed. I'll show you how important that principle is in a little bit. So, that United Nations Charter is analogous in some ways to our Constitution, but it's not. What is law? All right, if we go to the next slide and ask that question, we understand that the General Assembly, which is composed of all the nations that are member of the United Nations, are not. The Assembly does not pass law. It can pass resolutions, and it can seek advisory opinions from the International Court of Justice, but it does not create law, except that it can ask nations to come together, as it did for the Law of the Sea Convention. Nations will come together through diplomacy, put together a convention. The General Assembly can even suggest, here's what should be in the convention. But until those nations at the convention agree to it and ratify it, it's not law. Okay. Next slide. So where is law in the United Nations? It's in the Security Council. The Security Council, in Chapter 7 of the United Nations, is designated as the enforcement power. The Charter says that the Security Council can determine what is necessary to enforce one of its resolutions. Now, we've had some examples of that, have we not? But remember, there are 5 permanent members of the Council out of 15, and those 5 permanent members each have a veto to stop any resolution that that somebody wants passed. For instance, just last week, the United States vetoed a resolution. The resolution was to demand a complete ceasefire in Gaza. And the United States vetoed it with the explanation that until the Security Council recognizes that Hamas is a terrorist organization, it's not going to support any such resolution. Right? So that resolution failed. Next. This is a very famous photograph. This is the Security Council in 1951. you remember what was going on in 1951? Well, I don't, except I consulted history books. I was born in that year. But that famous photograph shows the absence of the ambassador of the Soviet Union to the United Nations. And because he was absent, the Security Council passed a resolution sending U.S. and other allied troops to Korea to fight the invasion by the Red Chinese and the North Koreans. Right? And that resolution would have failed, and there would have been another story about Korea if that ambassador wasn't there. Why? Did they catch him going to the restroom or something? No. Stalin had ordered all his diplomats to return home to protest the activity in the United Nations that was against the people's republics on one thing or another. Right? And so the old adage, he shot himself in the foot. Next slide, please. There are several courts that we're going to talk about tonight. Everybody talks about the Hague Court, but you know, there are two courts that are the Hague Court that have been established courts for some time. First is the Permanent Court of Arbitration. That was established as a result of two Hague Conventions back in let's see, the first one was 1899 and then 1907. And they were searching to establish a international court at that time, but they couldn't work it out, so they established what they called the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And that court is still in existence in The Hague, in that building that you see there. The second court that is in The Hague is the International Court of Justice. It succeeds the court that was established in conjunction with the League of Nations after World War I, which dissolved when World War II broke out. But the International Court of Justice uses what they call the Permanent Court of International Justice, uses all of its opinions and files and everything quartered in their headquarters in The Hague. And then there can be other courts in The Hague too. Arbitration courts that are established by the PC, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and specialized courts established by the Security Council. Next slide, please. Next slide. Let's skip that one. So what is our distinction between domestic law and international law? Think. Do we obey domestic law because there's a cop on the corner? I see somebody shaking their head. No. No! Why would you say that? Aren't we afraid that if we do something wrong, if we speed, we'll get a ticket? But Anthony, you drove down tonight at speeds barely above 60 miles an hour. Now, yes, that violated the 55-mile-an-hour limit, but it was still reasonable. The cop wouldn't have stopped you, right? Why did you do that? You told us when you drove down that you like to drive safely and not endanger our lives or the lives of other people on the road, right? That is the reason why the idea that we obey a law because there's a cop on the corner is incorrect. It sounds good, but when you examine it, you see that it doesn't fully hold its weight. Okay. Most of our law on the domestic side is compliance with little things, like obeying the speed limit on the road, right? Most of international law is also compliance with routine things. I have a picture there that was taken of me with some fellows. We were working for the State Department at the time. We were teaching port and maritime security in Burgos, Bulgaria. How did we get to Burgos? Well, there was a bilateral treaty between the United States and Bulgaria that enabled the State Department to do this. Routine stuff. So, what about that? If routine stuff constitutes the bulk of law, both domestically and international, how do we answer the question then, first of all, do we obey the law, and second of all, why? Well, the first answer is yes, we obey the law in most of those instances. And why do we do it? Well, there's a self-interested answer there, because it's within our interest to do so. And just as it is within our interest to drive safely on the highways, it is within the interest of nations to sign routine agreements like this, abolition of visa requirements, abolition of double taxation, many such routine agreements like that. And they're called agreements, memorandums, and protocols, so they don't have to get 2/3 approval by the Senate.
Dr. Howard, I know I am the moderator, just, and I don't want to take advantage, but it is easier to apply those routine procedures if countries belong to the NATO organization or outside of NATO? Is NATO...
The answer to your question is that it is easier if the parties involved share a community of values. More.
Yeah, because for us, and here I'm very pleased that you have a representative from the Pacyprian organization here, and because both Greece and Cyprus, we are part of the NATO, and we have this dispute in the Mediterranean Sea and the Aegean Sea with Turkey and their, threats and as you call it, tensions that we have.
Right.
And although we are NATO members, we don't see that the law is applied equally to, among the three countries.
There are some things to say about that. Under Henry Kissinger.
Oh my goodness! Why you mention this name?
Under Henry Kissinger, the worst of America's balancing act between Greece and Turkey became known. Okay, but I want to draw your attention to what a refugee from Nazi Germany, who became a learned professor here at CUNY. His name was Hans Morgenthau. You may be familiar with him.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, Hans Morgenthau was a great international lawyer, and he pointed out what I've been telling you tonight, that nations throughout the history of international law have mostly complied with it. All right, so where does that leave us? Next slide, please. The answer to the question of whether nation states obey international law is this. The essential answer to that question is that nation states obey international law because it's generally within their interest to do so. When it is not within their interest, they avoid it, ignore it, strategize around it. And we'll see cases of that tonight, including in the Eastern Mediterranean and in the South China Sea. Now, we're going to get into some hot area here. So we go right here, right? So I wanted to quote some wise men. Solomon, first of all, in Proverbs. Right? He that answers a matter before he heareth it, well, it's folly, and shame unto him, right? And then Voltaire. it is clear that anyone who has the power to make you believe absurdities can make you commit criminal injustices. So, let's go on to the next slide. Caution, approaching hot issues. Next slide. Oh. My first example of a nation state acting within its self-interest is the United States in the Vietnam War. In 1954, at a press conference, Dwight David Eisenhower, President of the United States at that time, explained the domino theory. He said, if you have a row of dominoes set up, you knock over the first one, it hits the next one, and the next one, et cetera, et cetera. That is what will happen if we lose South Vietnam, Cambodia, Burma, Thailand, right? Next. So, during Eisenhower's time, we sent military assistance to Vietnam, and our excuse for doing that was that we had been invited by the Saigon regime of Ngo Dinh Diem. But these were not really formal international agreements. They were executive letters between Eisenhower and Diem. During the Kennedy administration, things really hadn't changed much, except in the summer of 1963, there was a coup against Diem. Kennedy was beset with what to do, but he was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. Following year was an election year. The standard bearer of the Republican Party against Lyndon Johnson was Barry Goldwater. He was a solid conservative from Arizona, and Lyndon Johnson was very successful in painting him to be a dangerous character. There's a famous political commercial of the time. There's this sweet little girl picking the petals off a flower. He loves me. He loves me not. He loves me. And then in the background, big mushroom cloud. Vote Lyndon Johnson, right? Johnson won the election in a landslide that had not been matched since Franklin Roosevelt's days. He had campaigned on the idea that he would keep us out of war and that he was not a dangerous character like Goldwater was. In February, right after the election, 1965, he ordered Operation Rolling Thunder. Operation Rolling Thunder was the saturation bombing of Hanoi and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You think Nixon was the only one that did that? Lyndon Johnson did that at the start of the war. In March, he landed 3,000 Marines in the northern part of South Vietnam at Da Nang. And they were still treading on the exchange of letters between Eisenhower and Diem. South Vietnam asked us in as a means of defending them against the invasion from the north. Next slide, please. You can't see it there, perhaps in the light, but that photograph is of the names inscribed on the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. The Vietnam War was one of the worst in the 20th century, and it involved the deaths of almost 3 million people on both sides of the 17th parallel, and including American servicemen and Allied soldiers from Australia and South Korea, among others. Right? Next slide. On July 20th, 1974, Turkey invaded Cyprus, responding to a Greek-led coup on July 15th. Now, it was orchestrated by the second Greek military junta, which had ousted Papadopoulos in 1973. This coup in Cyprus aimed to overthrow the democratically elected president of Cyprus, Archbishop Makarios III, and achieve a union of Cyprus with Greece, or at least that was the stated goal, enosis. And the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was declared as a result of the Turkish invasion on November 15th, 1983. Today it's only recognized by Turkey. All right, next slide.
Yes.
These are the parties responsible, and here's where Henry Kissinger comes in. You may or may not be familiar with a book written by Christopher Hitchens.
Oh, yes, of course.
You're familiar with that?
We read him 3 times at Queen's College.
His book is entitled The Trial of Henry Kissinger. He thinks Kissinger ought to be, should have been put on trial for war crimes.
They made a documentary
Yes.
in Chile and other countries.
Kissinger's actions made America complicit in the Turkish invasion because he had intelligence months before the coup really got underway, that this was being hatched, that it was going to happen. America could have put a stop to it. We had the power to do so. But for whatever his reasons are, and you can examine his memoirs, and he still doesn't come clean on exactly what his reasons were. He just said, I was surprised Nixon was resigning. Who could expect this happening between Greece and Turkey? Well, nonsense, because he had the intelligence months beforehand, months before we knew that the tape decision by the Supreme Court and Nixon was going to resign. Right? So what was the result? Similar to Vietnam, when nations disobeyed the law, acting in their perceived self-interest, people got hurt. Next slide, please. So in 1976, the United Kingdom House of Commons Select Committee on Cyprus stated that Britain had a legal right to intervene. She had a moral obligation to intervene. She did not intervene for reasons which the government refuses to give. So not only was Kissinger silent unto his death, but the British government, both Tory and Labour, have refused to give their reasoning. Next slide. Here's Article 4 of the Treaty of Guarantee of 1960 between Greece, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. Right? In the event of a breach of the provisions of the present treaty, Greece, Turkey, and the United Kingdom undertake to consult together with respect to the representations or measures necessary to ensure observance of those provisions. Turkey made some representation to Greece and the United Kingdom. Greece did not answer Turkey's representation. The UK had a consultation with Turkey. They didn't make public what the comment was. And as you saw from the previous slide, they're still mum on it. But the day after that consultation was the day of the Turkish invasion. So once again, do nations obey law? In this case, they did not. If you are required in an article like this to consult together, it's like my students. I tell them, why don't you apply to this company? Well, I sent them an email. I said, when did you send the email? 2 weeks ago. Are you waiting on an answer to the email, or have you picked up the phone and called? Have you gone and knocked on the door? Oh, I didn't think of that. Right? So And the same thing here, but this is done with a forethought. They want to go through the motions so they can say, well, we tried to consult.
And also, a few years later, the UN, they don't recognize, they pass a law here that they don't recognize.
They don't recognize the Turkish Republic in the
and they
north.
declare it as a legal occupation, which
That's
is still
correct.
51 years later. So, in this case, it has to do who is the superpower and what serves the interest of the superpower.
The Security Council. Now, suppose the United States wanted to favor Greece.
Greece is I don't care about favoring Greece. It has to be justice for Cyprus. It is not, I don't think so, it is a matter of favoring anyone. It is to apply the law, which is...
No, maybe
Give
use
us more.
the wrong term,
Okay.
favors Greece. I'm positing something, all right? We understand the 5 permanent members have a veto power.
Yes.
And they use that when they perceive their interests are involved, all right? American policy toward Greece and Turkey is to keep antagonisms in balance for the reason of NATO. And that was particularly strong during the Cold War. But now things have changed around, but even though it's not the Soviet Union, Russia's still a power, and we have the war in Ukraine. And Turkey's right on that border. And so American policy has been to waffle.
Yeah.
And
We saw that even in the Greek War of Independence, although Monroe supported the revolt by Greece against the Ottoman Empire, they never legally and openly accepted it or made it clear that they supported, because it was Turkey, the main route of opium from Turkey and the Ottoman Empire to China. So they favor the Turks. It's not a new phenomenon.
right.
Therefore, if I may to have a parenthesis, I'm sorry to interrupt you on your thoughts, but I want to let our audience understand, because this year is also the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Paciprian, and it had a stupendous job against Turkey and the illegal occupation, and they managed the lobby, which was the last time that the Greek-American community was unified and had a strong lobby. After that, it was nothing really political. They managed to establish an arms ban because they found out that it was illegal, according to the law that you mentioned, the agreements, that Turkey used NATO weapons in order to attack another NATO member country. And they managed to have the embargo, as they call it, for 2 years. And I'm very proud to say that the Queen's College Library is called Benjamin Rosenthal Library, who was a Democrat politician here, elected in Queens, and he was the chair of the committee for the Cyprus issue. And as a Hellenic American project, we are the only college and the only center that we did an exhibition.
Yeah, the Greek oral history.
Yes, but also we had a commemoration of the 50th of the grim anniversary of the invasion, and we had a photo exhibition at the Queen's College, and at the archives we still have it because they wanted to commemorate the 50th year of Paciprion, and we still have it there. And we discovered that it was clear that the American foreign policy that wanted to support their interests through Turkey. We have a letter that I discovered in the archives of Rosenthal, that they opened it after 30 years now. President Carter making clear that Turkey is our ally, and the embargo finished. So it's a matter of power, after all. Yes. The law is the law, the legal procedures are legal procedures, but the point is who controls all this?
It is a matter of power and perception. If the United States were to perceive that it is within its interest to settle the Cyprus situation, it could easily take a resolution to the Security Council to that end, right? Mm-hmm. But it has not done so. It's chosen to waffle. And Kissinger was particularly despicable in the way he handled things, but it's not too different from the way we've handled things since Kissinger. And it goes back to the point I made. Nations obey the law when it is within their interest. When it's not within their interest, they find ways around it. And we see that continuing today. Well, I have slides further down the line, but I'll mention it right now, that there is two treaties between Turkey and Libya, right? One is a maritime delimitation agreement. And that particular agreement actually uses language that Turkey has in the past in diplomatic language refused, exclusive economic zone, right? EEZ. They're not a member of the Montego Convention, and they don't have one, and they say that Cyprus and Greece's attempts to use that part of the Montevideo Convention are illegal. But yet, in their delimitation agreement, their bilateral agreement with Libya, they use that term and they've delimited quite a bit of water. Now, they registered that treaty with the United Nations. There's Article 102 of the United Nations Charter says that all treaties or international agreements done between members of the UN must be registered with the United Nations. Consequences of not registering are that those agreements cannot be used in any forum, United Nations forum, in any argument before the General Assembly or Security Council or International Court.
So, according to your expertise, can countries challenge treaties? Because among us today is Mr. Nikos Kastrenakis, who is a QC graduate also, dear
yes,
friend. He is also the president of many organizations, Cretans, etc. But recently, and this is very, I'm very thankful that you did that, creating the Eleftherios Venizelos Council, and you travel all over the world, you promote the city, who was, maybe has some weak points in his political career, but definitely expanding the boundaries of Greece is one of the greatest achievements of all times. And the Lausanne Agreement, right, which is a very important agreement for Greece and the Mediterranean law and the waters. And
there's another example where France could have interceded and done things in it.
And at this moment we have Erdogan and Turkey and the Galazia Patrida mentality, the blue, how they call it?
The blue homeland.
Yeah, the blue homeland,
yes.
Right? Challenging international agreement. So do countries have this right to challenge treaties? By the way, there is a
treaties can be challenged.
An event, right, that you have to mention later, that is here, right? Yeah.
Treaties can be challenged if they go against something called jus cogens, which are peremptory norms of international law. A peremptory norm of international law includes genocide. Okay. That's prohibited, right? Interestingly enough, it has only been prohibited since 1948. Because we now have a treaty, a convention on it. And it's so important, and so many nations are part of that convention, that the great argument is that it has become common international law, and it's become that certain type of common international law, which is jus cogens. A peremptory norm must be followed by all nations, whether or not they've signed up for it, right? So, a treaty if it violates or is accused of violating peremptory norms of international law can be challenged. Where can it be challenged? The Security Council is the best place to go, right? Because you cannot go to the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice requires both parties to dispute to agree to take the matter to the court. The Philippines took China to a court on their delimitation of the South China Sea because there's a provision of the Montego Convention that gives a party to a dispute with another party of the Montego Convention the ability to put an arbitration together. And the Permanent Court of Arbitration handles that under the Montego Convention. And when they were first presented the briefs and everything by the Philippines delegation, they waited for the Chinese. The Chinese said they're not going to participate because it was illegal. There was no way that they had consented, so it was illegal.
Yeah. Do you think that the private sector now, making money, the market, can play a role now? It is correct that countries now, they sign this agreement, they call it AOS, right, to find oil, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Greece has some alliances in various times with Israel, sometimes with Egypt, Lebanon, and Turkey then sometimes tries to get involved or be part of it or to destroy the agreement. So, because this is the market, big companies, oil companies, they want to make money, but also that can bring some political leverage to the countries who sign the agreement. Mm-hmm. So the market plays a role in the modern era of globalization.
True, and you're very correct. Companies want to explore the riches on the seabed, but most companies don't have any military power that's going to stand up against a Turkish frigate, right? And so when you've had the surveys being conducted recently by the Italian ships to lay the cable for the Great Sea Interconnector, they've been shadowed by a Turkish frigate. And Turkey has warned that any attempt to lay a cable is going to be met with due force. How to respond to that? Well, the UN Charter says if you have a dispute with a member nation, you need to have consultations with them. You need to get together and talk about it. Okay. That's easier said than done, as we can see regarding just about everything that's going on today, right? But it's not impossible. If you remember the dispute in Northern Ireland, surprisingly, despite the loggerheads that those two sides had been at with each other for many lifetimes, they resolved that dispute. And they resolved it through an American intermediary and men of faith on both sides to sit down and talk and have the discussion. But there was, even between the Protestants and the Catholics, there was some common measure of community and culture there. There's not so much between Erdogan's Turkey and Greece. However, Greece should note, and no doubt has, that Erdogan thinks he has natural allies in Egypt, for instance. He doesn't. The Egyptians are very upset about what's going on with Erdogan.
Yeah, because Turkey wants to play the role of the leader in the Muslim world.
Right.
And definitely no one from the other side wanted to do that. But nevertheless, how your critique, Greece was the 10th member of the European Union. It was member of the National Council here. It was also the first Balkan country to be part of the EU. And still, we have the only European country divided, Cyprus. And still we have Cyprus claiming the waters, and it is a dispute because for some reasons the water line is about 3-4 miles for Turkey, the Aegean Sea, and the air is a different measurement, it's a different distance. So every other day there is Turkish invasions, with airplanes to the Greek airspace, and we have these disputes.
Yeah.
So all those things, how is possible to have a different measurement in the water and on the ground, and a different measurement in the air? What kind of law is that? Is a bad law, or it is how things are produced, framed, or constructed?
I have a slide I'd like to show on the baselines.
Please.
Could you move the slides ahead a little bit here? Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
Or all this is a clever way to keep countries
Here, stop there.
in constant, dependency. Is a way, because if Greece spends 50% of the gross national product to buy weapons, and now the whole Europe is weaponized. And I don't know about you, but the moment I see that Germany builds again an army, brings me the chills. So instead of investing to welfare state, instead of investing to education, health, the environment, Europe becomes again a military state. Or this is
well, the Europeans for years had the American military umbrella, nuclear and conventional, and people who support Trump agreed with him that Europe wasn't paying for its fair share. And that was complicated. That was complicated.
Greece, probably.
That was complicated by Putin seeing an opportunity and invading Ukraine, and that's clearly against the UN Charter. He essentially did it and said, "What are you going to do about it?" Right? So we have a situation here where the United Nations is founded on the concept of a community of nations. Do we have such a community? The answer is, if so, it's a very flawed community with a lot of our relatives playing fisticuffs with each other, right? This slide that I have here shows you the Montego Convention's arrangement for what we call the zones. First, we start with territorial waters, and we start with the lowest tide, because you don't want to, that, we start with that as the baseline and not the one up above. Go diagonal to your left, to your left. We don't start with that as a baseline.
Okay.
And the answer to why is because that's high tide. If we draw the baselines from low tide, we got more space, right? More territory, right? So the baseline is drawn from the coast. We go out 12 miles. That's the Montego Convention.
Yeah.
But the Montego Convention says that, yes. And next, we go another 12 miles, and that's the contiguous zone. The contiguous zone is a quasi-territorial zone. We don't have full sovereignty over it, but we have the right to chase criminals in the contiguous zone and apprehend them, all right? That's what that's all about. But we have something else going on here, and that is 200 miles out. 200 miles out, we have the exclusive economic zone. And below that, we also have the continental shelf. How is this all begun? In, I think it was 1948, Chile and Ecuador claimed what today would be called an exclusive economic zone, and they tied it to their continental shelf. And President Truman's advisors warned him that this was going to take off and countries were going to be grabbing territory, and they suggested that the United States claim its waters. Truman said, well, if we do it, everybody else is going to do it. So the only thing I'm going to do is pay attention to the resources on the continental shelf. And he issued his famous Truman Proclamation of 1948, which enunciated American sovereignty over resources of the continental shelf. All of that made it to the third United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea and was distilled as you see it there. However, there is a provision in the Montego Convention that says this cannot be applied if it infringes upon the interests of a third party. And this is where Turkey says its position has legitimacy, because application of the Montego Convention in the Eastern Mediterranean runs afoul of its interests. But Turkey's not a member of the convention. Yet, in that maritime delimitation treaty with Libya, they grab what amounts to a 200-mile exclusive economic zone that they can explore hydrocarbons off the Libyan shores and everything. So, again, Turkey's acting with its self-interest. It has a quasi legal basis for its arguments, but what it needs to do with good faith is to sit down with its neighbors and work things out. And I don't believe that's ever been tried yet in the history of this matter.
Professor, I don't know how you remember all this. Are you a politician or are you a professor? It's like you're a member of the government. You know all the laws, all the treaties, all the measurements. It is unbelievable. Congratulations. Thank you very much for giving us your light, your perspective to all that, your knowledge, which is extremely important. Do you see any way out of all this?
I think in my conclusion, if I could...
we'll love that.
Let's take it... yes, all the way down to the last few slides, to where it says conclusion. My conclusion, as you can see, I had introduced different schools of thought about international law. One group is the realists. All right, Eric Posner is a professor in Chicago, well known as the consummate realist, and he believes that international law really is epiphenomenal, and that means that it is secondary to power and the interests of those with power, self-interest, right? There's not much to argue about with Mr. Posner, except to say, like Hans Morgenthau said, aside from that, nations obey international law when it is within their interest to do so, and most of the time it's within their interest to do so. So what can I say? I'd say that in the final analysis, international law is human. And though parts of it are actually derived from concepts of natural law, right? It's imperfect. Next slide. This is my conclusion. It's truly imperfect in comparisons to Christ's commandment to love one another, right? Moreover, God's law is that vengeance is not ours. I quote Paul in Romans, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." And then Matthew, I quote here, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Now that is a very hard commandment to follow, even for people who consider themselves devout Christians. If you asked for that commandment to be put into effect. And then you started talking about the war in Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening between Cyprus and Greece and Turkey, or what's happening with China and the South China Sea. Is there a way that we can put this into effect? I think it's worth exploring, because violence begets violence. My PhD chair, many years ago, as an exercise, asked me to consider this proposition. What if after Pearl Harbor, we had simply sent a note of protest to Tokyo and said that we want to discuss this, had not declared war on the other two Axis powers? How many lives would that have saved? I thought that was crazy. But the more I think about it, God doesn't require things of us that we cannot do. He doesn't give us burdens that we cannot bear, however heavy they may be. And I think where there's a will, there's a way to follow his commandments. That's my conclusion.
Thank you. Again. Wow, we can open the floor for questions. I have a whole list of questions.
Okay.
Yes, Nico.
So, Dr. Howard, let me first express my gratitude for having you here today and for sharing all this knowledge and experience in a very short amount of time. So, as me not being a lawyer, if I understood correctly, when you spoke about the exclusive economic zones and how those agreements between nations get registered at the United Nations Registry. And then, if I understood correctly, you said you can dispute and resolve if you believe that something is not according to the law. You have to go to the Security Council.
The Security,
So therefore, the Security Council has some authority.
you could try first going to the International Court of Justice. But the caveat there is that the other party, Turkey in this case, would have to agree to take the dispute to the International Court and abide by the ruling.
Yes.
So, if that does not happen, then you need leverage of power. Where do you get leverage of power in the international system? That's the Security Council. And support of the 5 permanent members for a resolution. And so far, that hasn't happened. Not only has the United States waffled in balancing the interest of Greece and Turkey and Cyprus, but so has the United Kingdom and the members of the European Union. If you note, the Security Council, I think it was 2020, passed a resolution forbidding military supplies to be sent into Libya. Right? There was a resolution of the Civil War sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council, and to support that arrangement, they said no military supplies go in. And the European Union, using that resolution as a basis, established what they call Operation Irini. And so they take it upon themselves to investigate suspicious ships going into Tripoli and other Libyan ports. Every time they try to board a Turkish ship, the Turkish say, you can't do it, that's illegal, and we won't let you on board. A couple of times, the Europeans have ignored that, found nothing, and received a lot of diplomatic messages from Istanbul, right? What is Operation Irini? It's supposed to be an activity of force supporting a resolution of the Security Council. but it's not undertaken by the Security Council itself, it's taken by the European Union. It's something less than the full authority of that body. Okay?
Definitely understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if a superpower decides to enforce a law, can enforce a law.
Mm-hmm.
So that's obvious and based on history. But my question is different. My question is, in that registry, if there is another treaty, another agreement on economic, exclusive economic zone, that actually comes in conflict with another registered treaty, then what does the law, is there any law that specifies how this conflict can be resolved?
No, there's actually a contradictory principle. Mm-hmm. Treaties must be obeyed. Mm-hmm. But those people, those countries in this instance who have not signed an agreement are not affected by it. Only when a treaty affects the interests of third parties do you have a dispute that can be taken to the Security Council or hopefully to the International Court. And if countries, if Greece and Cyprus and Turkey have a dispute, and it's not within the interest of the members of the Security Council to resolve that dispute, it's not going to be resolved, and we've seen that over the decades.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly right. Ladies first.
Well, thank you very much. I'm on very thin ice with this, so excuse me, Dr. Howard, but I'm wondering about what we've done with the Houthis in the China Sea. Where did our right to do that come from? Was that a constitutional thing, or where did, because you mentioned in the beginning, you mentioned something about even our Constitution says something to that effect. Where did that come from?
We have a chief executive who is also commander of the armed forces, right?
Yes.
And since the Korean War, well, actually before that, there was the expedition against Mexico where an expeditionary force was sent against Pancho Villa, and some other escapades in the 19th century, where the authority of the commander-in-chief is simply relied upon for military actions that are not treated formally as war. It's similar to the provisions on a treaty. You have to get 2/3 agreement of the Senate, but if you don't call it a treaty, you don't have to, right? So it's playing around with words. Lawyers like to do that. We know that. And even the founders of our Constitution played around with words in this respect. What they tried to create was a system of checks and balances, where if the president wants to do this, finally it riles enough members of Congress that they can impeach him or do whatever, right? So the authority for America to attack the Houthis was that provision in the Constitution that gave the president the power as commander-in-chief to direct the military.
I see, and that's it. And
That's it.
That's it.
That's
All
it.
right, thank you.
Two questions. The occupied site of Cyprus since 74, could it conduct treaties, agreements with any other country, or delineation of exclusive economic zone since it's not recognized by any country other than Turkey?
I didn't get to it, but if you want to use the PowerPoint, you're welcome to it, but I'll tell you now that there's a system called recognition, all right? The United States recognizes a country. That country may be very small in size. There's an island in the South Pacific called Nauru, which probably isn't even as large as Astoria, right? And yet it's a member of the United Nations. Most nations of the world have embassies there, including the United States, right? What is recognition? It's the government of one government saying to another, we see you have sovereignty over your territory and your people. Right? No nation, except Turkey, has recognized the Northern Republic on Cyprus. Okay? So, in order to do so, to have an agreement with another country outside of Turkey, that other country would have to recognize, diplomatically recognize, North Cyprus as a nation state. Right? But it's the United Nations, it says it's illegitimate. Here's another thing. The United Nations says North Cyprus is illegitimate, but what is it doing about it? Right? So on the one hand, if you brand something illegitimate, all right, so it's wrong, it's against the law, what are you going to do about it? So many times we have that question, what are you going to do about it? Well, just like in ship management, you have to figure out what the cost of doing something about it is going to be, right? Did you note the number of lives that were lost when President Eisenhower and President Johnson thought it was within American interest to go into Vietnam and do what they did, right? So, to go back to my conclusion at the end of my talk here, the answer to the question is, what are you going to do about it? May be to let it rest in God's hands.
Can I ask my second question?
Yep.
Overlapping exclusive economic zones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Turkey delineates diagonally with Libya, ignoring the exclusive economic zone of Crete.
Mm-hmm.
But Greece delineates with Egypt that is across.
Mm-hmm.
Where would we go with this? It's overlapping. One is claiming it's not done right because it's diagonal and it violates the rights of the islands. How do we resolve this?
Well, I could tell you three things, right? And two of them are most unlikely. The first unlikely one is for Greece to ask Erdogan to meet together and discuss delimitation in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? Unlikely. Second, these are clearly opposing matters that violate some of the precepts in the Montego Convention and therefore fall within the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. Send a diplomatic request to Istanbul and say, we would like to take this case to the International Court of Justice. Unlikely to happen, right? Third, oppose force with force. That's what humans always do, right? So in the Great Sea Interconnector, instead of leaving the Italian ships out there on their own, have them shadowed not only by Greek frigates, but a European Union contribution, right? Now, that could be calling a bluff. On the other hand, it might not be calling a bluff. It might lead to violence, and violence begets violence. Do we want a war situation in the Eastern Mediterranean? That's a consideration that has to be considered.
Thank you.
I don't know, as a director or as an audience?
An audience.
Okay, okay then.
So, right now, the United States have a problem with China
Mm-hmm.
and the South China Sea, because and the main argument that the United States uses is that you guys don't obey the international law of the sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the argument that the United States puts forward, but when the United States have allies that do not obey this law, and the United States keeps supporting them, like Turkey, I think that China can say, well, you say we don't obey the international law. How about you guys, your alliance over there? Do you guys do that? We see, you know, like a Libya, Turkish-Libya kind of exclusive economic zone going over Crete. So what are you talking about? Which law? So if somebody doesn't respect the law, I think, that makes the law less powerful. If one starts not respecting the law, then some others follow. And I think the United States, it would be more like, should force these laws. And the big countries like Russia and other countries that have power to try to force these laws that make sense, right?
I agree that
But
if we...
these guys are, these bastards are our bastards, so, you know, we play differently. That's how they say sometimes.
No, I think you're correct. Excuse me a moment.
I think the US has not.
However,
But they do use it as an argument, right? Against the
Excuse me, no discussion among us. Please, Professor, go ahead.
I think you're correct that the United States should be the city on the hill, the light, you know, the model of behavior, but it is not. And it operates within its own interest or perceived interest by our politicians, as I showed you with the Vietnam War and with Kissinger with respect to the Turkish invasion of Cyprus. So it does undercut international law, because the cynicism is there with the school of realists who accurately say that law is really an extension of power.
Yep.
It has little to do with morals and little to do. We don't even talk about natural law anymore. This is such a secular and degenerated world. But natural law is where things like equality before the law came from. And natural law was first posited by the philosophers who presented it to us as something God gave to us, like in our Declaration of Independence, right? We are in a very imperfect world, and so my only answer to you on that is we have to try our best to realize the imperfection and do our best to make it better. It's sometimes very hard to do. And stepping back from something that we would like to enforce, because the strong possibility, if we step forward with a strong fist, it's going to get people killed.
In continuation of your marvelous question, that remember that the first war that America did, a foreign war, was the Barbary Wars, right? So it was a naval war. It's about water, the natural waters. So we attacked, right? We established, the first foreign war.
It's in the Marine hymn, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli.
Exactly. So you see the history. You made me think again what you said. All of what you said, made us think, and I have to see your PowerPoint more times and use it. But what you said, if we want to have a war now or tensions in Eastern Mediterranean, and this is extremely important, because I think the Eastern Mediterranean, for a long time, but especially now with the Cyprus issue, is a test case for the future of international maritime order, I believe. For Greece and for Cyprus especially, the stakes are not just economic, or legal issues, but I think are existential issues. And because they involve sovereignty, as you very well put it, national dignity, definitely regional stability. And I think the law of the sea in this region is essential not only of those two nations, but it involves the credibility of international law itself. So it has to be an international issue. And this is what Cyprus tries to do. This is what Greece tries to do. This is what the PSECA tries to do, to make the issue an international issue. It's not among the two countries. It is more than that. And my last comment on your marvelous presentation is that Greece and Cyprus must continue to stand firm, either legally grounded or diplomatically engaged against coercive strategies.
Yes.
I understand your conclusion with the law of God, but definitely we need to rewrite maritime rules and laws.
Christ said to turn the other cheek, but he did not say to commit suicide.
Yes. Very well put. So I think it's a time to reevaluate and rewrite maritime rules through force.
I have a question. We talked before about the...
And that will be the last question. You have to have...
Anyway,
Of course, by all means. Sorry, because it is this bloody lamb of the stream, and I cannot see anything.
You talk about continental shelf. I can't pronounce it.
Continental shelf.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the case with Chios, Limnos, a lot of eastern Aegean islands. So, what's the case?
Almost all of the Eastern Mediterranean could be considered a continental shelf.
It's really sitting on that, and Turkey can actually, they argue about that. So, what's the case when it comes to Greece? I mean, who is right or wrong, and who can argue what?
Can I supplement the question?
Yeah.
So what it pretty much says that Turkey recognizes the islands, the Greek islands, but they don't recognize the sea around the Greek islands. They say the islands should not have an exclusive economic zone. So the question is, are the Greek islands?
No, I'm not trying to ask that.
Oh, okay.
It's about, because I remember that from the 1980s, now my age is comes out. So, but do they have a point for those islands? I'm not talking about exclusive economic zone.
No, if you look at the negotiations at Montego Bay, this was all debated, and it really revolved around these issues being asked by the island states in the South Pacific. And this is something that China is utilizing to its advantage. Yes, rocks, islands, whatever you want to call them, they are part of a country's territory, and therefore the baselines can extend from that territory. You can see why Turkey doesn't want that to be the case, right?
Well, we have the sad incident of EMEA a few years ago. So that's very well. Please.
Quick question. About the occupied area in Cyprus.
Yes.
We estimate we have approximately 1,000 families in the United States. 51 years later, they are American citizens. They have properties in the occupied area. And today, Cyprus is a full member of the European Union. We can go in our land to our houses, but as a visitors. Is it any system through the legal system in the United States, or is it going to be a political push that we have to do with the State Department, that we have rights that...
You have rights as an American citizen if a foreign nation has damaged you to sue that nation in federal district court.
Okay.
So you would have to prove how the foreign government has damaged you. you have to show damages
As individual.
as an individual. Yeah. And then you can take it to court.
For that one, I think it was one exercise, I don't remember which state, it was a Greek Cypriot who went to the court and actually was demonstrated that were also, like the weapons came from NATO and they killed people and they suffered. But I don't remember the outcome. But today, 51 years later, is it any case through the legal system?
I don't know of any case involving suing because of damages to a person or family in northern Cyprus. But the general principle is if you are an American citizen and have been damaged by a foreign government, you have the right to sue in federal district court.
Excellent. Well, I cannot thank you enough.
Oh, thank you for moderating.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Something that actually Mr. Howard actually he liked it. I don't know how Greeks are going to see that. Most of think tanks, they try to specialize on something very special because everybody tries to talk about international laws, geopolitics, tensions, and stuff like that. So when it comes to Famagusta Council, we decide that we're going to specialize on the law, space law, what's going on now and in the future when it comes to space exploration, space law, and actually you can help me about what you said last time.
Yeah, I said space law draws a lot on international law of the sea, and not only space law, but the Antarctic Treaty.
Exactly.
Is based on Arvid Pardo from Malta. Mm-hmm. He brought the concept of the common, second word escapes me at the moment, but Arvid Pardo, the Maltese ambassador to the United Nations, at the end of the 1960s, made a presentation that the resources of the sea, especially the deep seabed, should belong to all of humanity. And that followed through, carried through, and ironically, it's one of the reasons why the United States never signed, it never ratified the Montego Convention because it objected to the Seabed Authority. Yeah.
And this is a small gift from us to you and your family. It's St. Cosmas Etolos. It's the church that we have upstairs, the small chapel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, your lady.
She's also Greek Orthodox.
She's not Greek, but she's Orthodox, and she understands most of the Greek. She was baptized.
Aretini.
I tried to say the last name, but it's like when you try to say my Greek last name, I'm Koskianos.
That's Greek too.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much again. I look forward to the next.
We'll do more.
Costa.
We'll do more.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.